Hello, this is Terrence McNally. Welcome to Free Forum, a world that just might work. Today's conversation is with ZEV YAROSLAVSKY, who served on the Los Angeles City Council and the LA County Board of Supervisors for a total of 40 years. He's written a political memoir, ZEV'S Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power. And today's conversation deals with the memoir more than the politics. We're going to talk about ZEV's early years, his family, his heritage, his college activism advocating for Russian Jews, and his surprise election to the city council at the age of 26. Please bear in mind, this conversation was recorded before the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas and the Israeli military response. To learn more about ZEV, go to luskin.ucla.edu. Luskin, LUSKIN.ucla.edu. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com. Podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net. TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Though I had spent a couple of weeks in the Los Angeles area when my girlfriend and I took a trip around the country in a VW van in the summer of 1969 after we both graduated from college, my first extended stay in LA came in 1972 when I was assigned here by the national staff of the McGovern campaign to run an assembly district in LA County, the 52nd. Its boundaries have been more than once remade in the 50 years since, but at that point, it was the most conservative, Democratic assembly district in the state. There were more conservative Republican districts in Orange County, the Central Valley, probably San Diego as well. And the 52nd included a lot of cities that many people who live in LA probably hardly know. Bell, Bellflower, Bell Gardens, Cudahy, Commerce, Linwood, Downey, Maywood, Southgate, Huntington Park. I moved from the west side of LA to Long Beach in 2017 and recently visited an open house at the local office of my congressperson, Robert Garcia. On one wall, he's hung mock street signs of each town in California's 42nd. And though the district includes some that were not in my old territory, most notably Long Beach, that wall displayed most of them. It was a funny feeling of my time here having come full circle. In 1972, the area included major factories, Firestone, Goodyear, Lever Brothers, Ford, GM, all of whom closed down over the next few years. It was working class to middle class, heavily unionized, and just beginning to change demographically. And I lived during the campaign in Downey. And except for a year in Cambridge and a year in San Francisco, I have lived in LA County ever since. And except for a couple of early years in Santa Monica, and as I said, the last few in Long Beach, most of those years in the city of Los Angeles. Well, today's guest, ZEV YAROSLAVSKY, also worked in the McGovern campaign in 1972. I assume we probably passed each other in the hallways. I believe the office was on St. Andrews, right next to Western on Wilshire. I believe he was in charge of Jewish outreach for the state of California. I ended up moving here for good in 1975, the year a 26-year-old activist in the cause for Soviet Jewry was elected to the LA City Council. ZEV YAROSLAVSKY was part of my local government for nearly 40 years until termed out in 2014. 19 plus years on the Los Angeles City Council and 20 on the LA County Board of Supervisors. He's now the director of the Los Angeles Initiative at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs and the Department of History, focusing on the intersection of policy, politics, and the history of the Los Angeles region. And as I said, he recently published his first book, ZEV'S Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power. ZEV never ran for mayor, never moved to Sacramento or to Washington, D.C. He studied history at UCLA, and I look forward to the chance to get a feel for his perspective on the past, his experiences, the emergence and the evolution of today's Los Angeles over those 40 years, the present, and hopefully some on the future, and probably some reflections on the larger political situation. How might the lessons he learned locally, albeit in a city and a county as populous as many states, but how might those apply to the nation as a whole? I hope anyone who listens to this show on a regular basis believes that I do mean it when I say it's about a world that just might work. And rather than be identified as political or progressive or environmental, though at times it certainly may seem to fit all of those, I want these conversations to be a search for a world and a society that works. And there are many who probably believe, and with good reason, that it is hard to find true public servants in politics or in elective office. But I believe ZEV Yaroslavsky to be one of those public servants. Welcome, ZEV Yaroslavsky, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
It's good to be with you, Terrence. Thank you very much. It's a privilege.
Let me tell listeners we're recording this conversation Friday, August 18th. So I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we end up talking about. And I mentioned some highlights of your story, but can you tell us in your words a bit about how you see your path to the life you've led? Now, since your book is a memoir, feel free to take time, just as you do in the book, with early life, even, your family ancestry, the things that have made you who you are and made you into the person who ran for office early and who served LA for as long as you did. Feel free to mention mentors, turning points, detours, moments of decision, that sort of thing.
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, Terrence. It's an honor. My book is a memoir, but it's also a history. The only thing I'm trained to do is jog and be a historian. I never used that degree during my career, although I did pay quite a bit of attention to history. So my history goes back, from my point of view, to my grandparents, who I never knew. They were all gone by the time I was born. But there's one member of my grandparent family, my maternal grandfather. They all lived in Ukraine. My parents were born in Ukraine, and they immigrated to the United States in the early 20s. My dad in 1921, my mother and her parents in 1923, and that's quite a saga, as you know. I'm not going to spoil the book for the readers, but it was a Dr. Zhivago kind of a story, and my grandfather was an idealist. He was one of these folks who he was a labor Zionist. He was a socialist, lowercase s, in Ukraine, very much anti the Tsar, and he was a teacher, Hebrew teacher in schools in Ukraine, and he advocated for social activism. That's where my mother got her social activism. My dad had his parents in a different part of Ukraine. They were less politically active, but my dad got active in the Zionist movement, labor Zionist movement in those days. My grandfather was one of the people of that generation that converted the Hebrew language from what was for 2,000 years a language of scripture into a functional language. There was no word for bathroom in Hebrew.
Sure.
Until he came around, his generation came around. And so he's always been fascinating to me. And fortunately, we have a lot of his writings, letters he wrote back to the old country, things he wrote while he was in the old country. The one I love the most, though, was he was writing a letter back to his friend in Ukraine and explaining how frustrated he was in New York, teaching 8-year-old kids who didn't pay attention to what he was talking about, and they didn't behave well. They threw spitballs across the classroom and kind of things I did when I was 8 years old. And then he says, in words that are etched in my psyche, he says, "The only thing these boys seem to care about is this game called baseball." Now, in 1925, 26, New York what would you rather be doing? Studying Talmud and Torah, or going or watching Babe Ruth? You
That's
know,
right. That's the 20. That's the 27 Yankees. That's
that's
Lazari,
right. That's
Gehrig.
right. So I kind of channeled him on that. I said he would not have had me as a very attentive student in those years. So, but and he was a kind of an amateur scientist. He was fascinated with physics. He did many experiments. He regaled his students in physical experiments and things like that. So I was fascinated by him. He died in 1940. They came to New York in the early 20s. They moved to LA in 1937 because he had some health issues, and his doctor recommended he go to a place with clean, dry air. And he came to Southern California, and
One for two isn't bad. Yep.
that's right. And as a result, that my mother, of course, came with him, and my dad. My mother and dad were married by then, and they settled in Boyle Heights, which is where I was born, and my sister was born. I spent the first 8 years of my life in Boyle Heights. I went to elementary school there. It was a great community. I still go back to Boyle Heights from time to time. I love the place. I have a lot of fond memories of it, and I care a lot about it. I mean, it's a community that itself has been stressed with change and gentrification and things of that sort. But my parents were union activists. They formed a Hebrew teachers union in LA in the early 40s. Politics and policy and social justice issues were the subject of our conversations around the dinner table. I didn't get an education by being lectured to. My sister and I got an education by watching what my parents did.
Sure.
And it made all the difference in the world. So when I grew up, when I was a teenager, we moved at the age of 8. We moved to the Fairfax area. And where I've lived within 8 blocks of the house my parents bought ever since. I'm still living in the same neighborhood. I'm a sociological oddity in that regard. I love this neighborhood.
You certainly are. No, it's wonderful. When I speak to people in small town America, if you will, that happens. People, live within blocks of their family home. But to do it in Los Angeles is quite something. I mean,
That's
it
true.
really, I think it's as much as anything a demonstration of who you are and how you relate to the city.
And it's also a strategic decision. The Fairfax area is actually centrally located to all the things that matter to me. Downtown, where I worked for 40 years, the airport, where I had to go to travel, Dodger Stadium, where I love to go watch Sandy Koufax. But everything used to be within 20 minutes of my house. Now it's 45 minutes
right.
from my house.
Same distance, different time.
That's exactly.
One thing that I know is true is what occasioned your parents move from Boyle Heights to Fairfax.
So my parents were Jewish educators. That's what they did for a living. And when they came to Los Angeles, they took over a school, an after-school school, where kids went to Hebrew school after regular school. Right. It was a labor Zionist kind of a school. It had social justice themes, equality to all peoples, and the way we were raised at home. And the school was in City Terrace, and they stayed in City Terrace is right next door to Boyle Heights. It's a 10-minute drive from our apartment to their school. And when in the last year of our residency there, the reason we moved was because my parents couldn't find enough kids to fill one classroom. The migration of after World War II, the Jewish community exodus from Boyle Heights began in earnest. People moved to the Fairfax area. Some moved to the San Fernando Valley. It was a time of a great migration of peoples all over the place. Big developments were taking place in the valley, new homes, cheap homes. And so my parents couldn't fill a classroom. We'd still be living in Boyle Heights if they could still sustain City Terrace Volksschule, as they called it. So when the school couldn't sustain itself, they shuttered it. It's now and has been for years, the Plaza Community Center on City Terrace Drive. I've gone back there many times and talked to the folks about my memories of the place.
Sure.
And we moved to the Fairfax area, where my parents continued to be Jewish educators, Hebrew teachers. My mother taught Hebrew at LA City College, the first Hebrew teacher in the community college system in LA. And I still run into people to this very day who tell me that they had my mother as a teacher at City College or elsewhere. She was one of those teachers where you have two or three teachers that made a difference in your life, and if you do, you're very lucky. She was always on that list for the people she taught. So I get to. She died when I was 10, so I never got to know her as an adult.
Wow. Yeah.
And But I do hear from people who had her as a teacher, especially the ones that were in college and had her as a teacher, and I get to learn through them, what kind of a woman she was, and what made her special to them. So it's kind of uh, fate's way of connecting me to my mother. It's a great tragedy for me. My sister is older than I am and got to know her as a teenager. I did not, and who knows how that affected my trajectory in
Sure.
some respects. But yeah, that was, and we lived here. I was a latchkey kid. My mother, as I said, died when I was young. But my dad taught after school. Right after he taught from 4 to 9 o'clock. He had two sessions, and he taught all over the place in the San Gabriel Valley, in the West Side, and the San Fernando Valley. And I was a latchkey kid. I was home alone. I had to cook my own dinner and do my own work and hold myself accountable for all I had to do. Was by the time my dad got home from work, I was sleeping, and it was a kind of a lonely existence there for a while.
Vin Scully. Vin Scully was probably who put you to bed, right?
Well, every night, every night, I had a radio right next to my bed, and I mean, I've listened to him. The book talks about this. My fantasy in life was to take his place once he retired. Of course, a damn good thing I didn't wait till he retired.
That's right.
But yeah, I was just enamored with him. I used to sneak into the press box at Dodger Stadium and try to be in his presence and just talk to him. He didn't tolerate young 13-year-olds coming into his broadcast booth. He kicked me out once. And he was talking to Danny Kaye, the great actor, comedian, dancer, all those things. Danny Kaye grew up in the same tenement that my dad lived in Brooklyn, and Kaye was younger than my dad, and my dad remembers when he had his bar mitzvah. He was kind of a rebel kid, and so I walk into the press box and I see Scully is talking to Danny Kaye, and I said, "Whoa, I've just won the lottery. I can talk to Kaye about my dad knowing his parents." And I didn't have a chance. Scully says, "Out that door, right there, out that door," and it broke my heart. But I got to know him in later years,
Sure.
and we became good acquaintances. He did a beautiful tribute to me, a very funny one when I retired. You can get it if you on YouTube. Just put in ZEV Yaroslavsky and Vin Scully, and it's a 3-minute bit which just brought the house down. It was fantastic. And I loved him. And yeah, so Vin Scully put me to bed every night, and I wanted to be like him. I wanted to tell stories like him. He was such a great raconteur. The one that I remember the most is the night, the Roy Campanella night, which most of your listeners probably don't remember, but it was a benefit baseball game between the Dodgers and the New York Yankees. It was an exhibition game to raise money for Campanella, and it sold out the Coliseum at the time. I think it was 1959, and it's 90,000, 92,000 people at the Coliseum. And I remember him describing at one point in the game, they asked everybody to light a match or a cigarette lighter, and the way he described the sea of lights, 90,000 points of light, if you will. And the thing about him that we all loved is that he proved the proposition that you can actually paint a picture with words.
Yes.
Not very many of us can do that, but boy did he did it. And I tried to convince him to write a memoir. I begged him to. I had the privilege of interviewing him on KPCC. They offered me an opportunity to substitute for Larry Mantle for one show, and he said, "You can interview whoever you want." And I asked Scully if he would be willing to do half an hour with me, and he did on the phone. And I said, "Are you thinking about writing a memoir?" He said he wouldn't do it. He says it's egotistical, and I said, "No." I said, "Vinny, What's egotistical is taking your stories to your grave.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's a gift, Vin.
Yeah, you owe it to all of us because he had so many stories. You could probably write a book based on the stories that we have of him on in recording on
That's
video.
right. What I was going to say is, at least in his case, they aren't lost.
That's right. The ones that are recorded. But I talked to him once. I mean, this is kind of off the subject, but it's interesting. We were at a book party of all things, a book signing party for somebody, and he was there. And I asked him, "What's your favorite memory of a World Series game?" Okay, is it Kurt Gibson's home run? Is it Don Larson's perfect game? He broadcasted all these things,
Sure.
right? And he says, "Well," and he talked the way he broadcasts. Pleasant good evening to you, Zeb, wherever you may be. And he would say, he said, the game I'm most that sticks in my memory is the 1941 World Series between I think it was the St. Louis Cardinals and the Dodgers. And it involved a pitch that got away from the catcher, a strike three pitch. The runner got the first, the batter was able to get the first base. The next guy hits a home run, and the Dodgers lose the championship. Not the Cardinals; it was the St. Louis Browns.
I was going to say, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't be the series if it was the Cardinals. Yep.
Yeah. And anyway, and so here's who remembers these things. I guess we all. He had an incredible memory, and anyway, yeah, Vince Scully was very much. I mean, I used to sit in front of a TV set with my dad's reel-to-reel tape recorder and broadcast games. I found those tapes in my garage some years ago, and I had them transferred onto CDs.
Sure.
I had a broadcast of the 1963 Rose Bowl between the USC Trojans and the Wisconsin Badgers, which at the time, up until more recent years, was the greatest Rose Bowl game ever played. It was number 1 versus number 2. It was a close game at the end, and here I am broadcasting.
And if I'm not mistaken, let me see if I'm right. Ron Vanderkellen passes for like 500 yards,
something like that. I don't know if it was 500, but he had a great game as receiver. Pat Richter and I think it was Pete Beathard was the SC quarterback. The SC was leading 42-14 in that game, and then Wisconsin in the second half just stormed back, and the final score was 42-37. They almost pulled it off. And in those days I was an SC fan because my mom got her master's in SC, but that didn't take long or much to change that allegiance once I got into UCLA.
Sure.
But yeah, so I have a recording of ZEV Yaroslavsky calling the play-by-play of the 1963 Rose Bowl game, and it, that was really if I had spent as much time perfecting my broadcasting skills as I did on my social activism stuff, who knows? I might have ended up in the broadcast field. But he in his video that he did for my retirement, he said he always knew that I wanted his job, and it always had him concerned, and so he wanted to take the bull by the horns now that I was retired. And he said he suggested that I get started in a lower classification of baseball, and he said the Dodgers have a minor league team in Class D baseball in Midland, Michigan. They're called the Great Lakes Loons. And he said that would, and by the way, Clayton Kershaw pitched for a short period of time for the Great Lakes Loons. Midland is the corporate headquarters of the Dow Chemical Company. So I suspect the history of the Dow Chemical Company. And the population of Midland hasn't changed very much in the last 100 years. The stadium, of course, is called Dow Stadium.
And he would have put in a good word for you, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would do whatever it took. Anyway, I recommend people look at that YouTube. It's very funny.
So I'll tell you what, I really appreciate actually, you're being willing to go down a pathway that deeply, because it as I said, I want people to meet you and not just the book or the political decisions and so on. So you end up at UCLA and you become an activist, as I said, and your cause is Soviet jewelry. And your explanation, which I know of why that was, is quite fascinating. Let us know.
So, you know, uh, I was a social activist kind of in my DNA. I'm sure I got it from my parents and my environment in Boyle Heights. And Boyle Heights was a cauldron of social activism, union activism, and things of that sort. And it was the 1960s, and I was, you know, the country was roiled in the civil rights movement. I was a little too young to go on a Freedom Rider bus. I would have if I had been older. I actually toyed with the idea when I was 15 or so, and
Mm-hmm.
my dad disabused me of that notion very quickly. And then the anti-war movement, and I was a participant. I wasn't a leader in it, but I certainly was a participant
Yeah,
in
we're
the
we're
marches.
by the way, we're about 6 months difference in age, so this
Yeah,
is all
so you
parallel
know
for
the
me.
drill. Yeah,
Yeah, that's why we were both working for McGovern.
for McGovern. Yeah, and I remember that headquarters on Western Avenue extremely well. It was a great headquarters because it was visible from the Hollywood freeway, and we had a big McGovern
Yes,
Shriver
we did.
sign that for hundreds of thousands of people a day driving there. It was it didn't win California for us, but it was a great experience. In any case, uh, I went to the Soviet Union in 1968 to meet my aunts, my dad's sisters, my grandmother, who had gone back to the Soviet Union. This is I'm not going to spoil the story, but
Right.
it's in the first chapter of the book. But she went back and ended up living in Leningrad. She passed away in 1964, and I never got to meet her, but my sister did. But my aunts, my dad's sisters, still lived in Ukraine, in Kharkiv, which of course has been in the news
Yeah.
the last year and a half. And so I made my grand tour of Europe that summer, and I went to I spent two and a half weeks in the Soviet Union. And my aunt met me. My older aunt met me in Moscow, and she was going to kind of be my tour guide, and the Yiddish mama, as they say, and she took me under her wing, and we're walking around Red Square, and I had already gotten active in the Soviet Jewry movement. Now, let me back up. When I had my bar mitzvah in 1961, I got dozens of telegrams from all the family friends who lived in New York and Israel and Chicago, you name it. We got one telegram from my aunts in Kharkiv, and all of the other telegrams said, congratulations on your bar mitzvah, mazel tov on your bar mitzvah. Everything was bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah. The telegram from Kharkiv was congratulations on your birthday. And I'm a precocious little 13-year-old. I asked my dad, what's with happy birthday? To everybody else is
Yeah.
mazel tov, bar
Didn't they
mitzvah.
get the news? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, you guys are telling me now I'm a man, and all I get is happy birthday. And he explained to me that if they had said bar mitzvah in the telegram, first of all, the telegram might never have gotten sent. It would have been intercepted. And secondly, he said they could be punished for it. They could be hauled into the KGB headquarters. Not likely they would have been sent to Siberia over a telegram, but you never know, and there's a lot of fear. And that got my attention at a relatively early age, and so I got interested in that whole subject matter. My grandmother in Leningrad survived the siege of Leningrad, which was one of the most brutal, you know, tragedies and murder that the Germans just surrounded the city and starved about a third of the population of Leningrad to death. And the irony, just to digress for a second, is that Vladimir Putin comes from Leningrad. He had a brother who was older than him who died of starvation in Leningrad during the war. And now he's doing the same thing to Ukraine
Oh.
trying to do the same thing to Ukraine as his family was victimized because he's an old Leningrader, St. Petersburg or whatever we call him
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
days. So I got interested in this issue, and as a high school student, I started to write articles about it in our school paper and things of that sort. And then I go to Russia in 1968, and we're in Red Square, and my Aunt Rosa says to me, taking me around. I say to my Aunt Rosa, I ask, so what's it like for Jews here in the Soviet Union? And she put her finger to her mouth and she said, shh, the walls have ears. And I'd never heard that phrase before. I knew what she was saying, and I was shocked by it, um, and, uh, and shocked for two reasons. Number one, that somebody could be listening in the middle of this huge square, and number two, uh, what do you mean the walls have ears? The nearest wall is 100 yards away. This is Red Square, for God's sake, and it just got my attention, my antennas up, because whether they could hear us or not, the fact that she was afraid they could altered her whole way of life. You don't talk about these things in open
That's right. At
in
that
the
point,
open.
it may not even be a practical consideration. It's a nervous response.
Exactly, and that's how dictatorships operate. Through fear, and you make the worst case scenario assumptions about whether they're listening to you or whatever, watching you. And sometimes they do, but I don't think in 1968 they had directional mics that were that
Right,
powerful. I
right.
could be wrong. But in any case, the way we communicated was on magic slates. And, you all remember the magic slates.
Yeah.
You'd write something on it, and then you show it to the person you're writing it for, and then you rip you rip the cellophane off and erase what you had written. That's the way you communicated on sensitive subjects when you went to the Soviet Union. And that trip transformed my life. I made a commitment to myself that when I came home, I would organize founded an organization, a movement of students on behalf of Soviet Jews. This was an issue that became very ubiquitous in the 70s, but it was not at all on anybody's radar screen in 1968. There were very few people involved in that issue.
So one sec. Let me tell people this is Free Forum, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking today with ZEV Yaroslavsky. He won a seat on the Los Angeles City Council at 26, served there and on LA County's Board of Supervisors for the next 40 years until he was termed out in 2014. He's written a political memoir, ZEV'S Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power. And you can learn more about ZEV's work at Luskin, Luskin, luskin.ucla.edu. Most people, or an awful lot of people that are listening, probably don't even remember what the issue was. What was it about
Yeah, good point.
Soviet Jewry that needed activism?
So uh, the Soviet Union had a system where uh, they categorized people by their nationality. If you were a Ukrainian who lived in Moscow, your internal passport, which was your internal identification card, compared to our driver's license, it had a space there for nationality. So if you were born in Kharkiv, and you lived in Moscow, your ID would say you're Ukrainian. If you were Belarusian, I would say Belarusian, etc. Even though it was supposed to be, one big happy country,
Right.
the USSR. There were 15 or so republics. They were all nationalities, but there were a lot of nationalities that didn't have their republics, and they were just considered nationalities. Jews were one of them. And anti-Semitism has been a part of the DNA of Eastern Europe and Russia and Ukraine and the Baltic countries, as it has in most parts of the world, for 1,000 years or more. And uh, so that it was part of their life. That's why so many Jews emigrated from the Soviet Union or Tsarist Russia, for that matter, in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. That's why my grandfather came. He was for the revolution in 1917. He hated the Tsar. My mother writes about the day that he took the Tsar's picture off of the wall in his classroom. He was thrilled, but then he realized that the Soviets, despite the fact that they said, we're not going to compartmentalize people, we're not going to categorize people, they wanted to get rid of religion. They didn't want nationalities to be dominant, even though they had nationalities. Uh, he saw trouble for the Jewish community, and there was, and of course, once Stalin took over, it was very palpable. And my grandfather saw it coming, and my dad saw it coming, and both of them separately. They didn't know each other back then. They made the decision to uproot themselves and come to a new land. So there was this ongoing history of anti-Semitism, some of it quite brutal. People who supported the creation of a Jewish state were, were persona non grata in many cases. Were exiled to Siberia, sometimes into labor camps, into the Gulag. We all know about Stalin's, Night of the Long Knives, and Jewish poets were murdered. I think just a few days ago we celebrated that, or commemorated that night. There was just a lot of anti-Semitism, and the trouble is that you could not um, you could not hide as a Jew. When anytime you did anything, if they required you to show your ID, it said Jew on the card, on your internal passport, and so it institutionalized discrimination. There were quotas about getting into the university, jobs you couldn't get because you were a Jew. It was just one of those things. My aunt Rosa, that we talked about, her maiden name was Yaroslavsky. Yaroslavsky is not a Jewish name in Russia. It's a Russian name. It's kind of a wobbler, like Newman. Newman can be Catholic, it can be Jewish.
Oh, right, right, yeah.
Yeah. Yaroslavsky, there's a Yaroslavsky buried in the Kremlin wall. He was a Stalin guy. My aunt never took on her husband's name because her husband's name, my uncle, I don't remember what his last name would be, Goldberg. Let's call him Goldberg.
Right, but clearly Jewish. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly Jewish. She preferred to use the non-Jewish uh, name, surname, and that's the kind of stuff that was going on. So, I'll give you an idea. I write in my book, there were 3.5 million Jews in the Soviet Union after World War II. There were less than 55 synagogues in the entire country. Kharkiv, a town of I don't know, a million people, a city of a million people. There were 100,000 Jews in Kharkiv during the post-war years. Did not have a synagogue, not one. And there are 50 synagogues within walking distance of my house in Beverly Fairfax. And there aren't 100,000 Jews in the Beverly Fairfax area. And in one of the biggest cities, in the second biggest city in Ukraine, one of the biggest cities in the Soviet Union, with one of the largest populations of Jews, no synagogue. So it gives you an idea of what was going on. There was one synagogue, main synagogue in Moscow. There were a couple of hovels out in the exurbs of Moscow. They weren't really, I wouldn't call them synagogues. There was one major synagogue. It was kind of a showcase, the Moscow Choral Synagogue. I actually spent some time in that synagogue during my trip in 1969. I made a separate trip, and Yom Kippur I spent in the Moscow synagogue. But they segregate the foreigners. You can't mingle with the congregants. You sit in this kind of royal box up next to the pulpit. So that's the
so that's what they were living with, but they wouldn't let them leave.
They wouldn't let them leave. They didn't let anybody leave. There was we call it the Iron Curtain for a reason. They didn't let people emigrate, and the Jews started a movement. There's a handful of them, I'd say a few thousand of them, who had the guts to, because technically you could apply to leave the country. Of course, 99.9% of the time you got rejected, and when you applied to leave the country, you were stigmatized. Like, why do you want to leave the socialist paradise? Yeah. Maybe we should send you to re-education camp, take you away from your job as a teacher in a high school, and maybe you should sweep the cemeteries.
Right. There were repercussions for wanting to leave, but leaving wasn't one of them.
Absolutely. And so this movement started to emerge, started by the folks in some of the younger Jews, professional Jews, who had something to lose. This is one of the great things that people don't appreciate. I mean, there was technically no middle class in the Soviet Union, but if you were a professor or a member of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR, and you asked to leave the country, you were risking everything.
Yeah.
You could lose your job. They could kick you out of the academy. They often did. And you could lose your apartment. I mean, there are all kinds of consequences to it, but they did it anyway. And then they got the attention of people like me, students from all over the Western world, adults as well, the Jewish community. more broadly was slow to react to it until Elie Wiesel wrote this book back in I think 1966, 67, called The Jews of Silence. And everybody assumed that he was talking about the Soviet Jews, that they were silent. And what you discover at the end of the book is that he's not talking about them, that he's talking about us who sit here in comfort in our in our homes and in our apartments in quote unquote freedom, and we keep our mouth shut. We don't say anything about it. Well, for the post-Holocaust generation, of which I'm a part, we've always been haunted by the question: what did our parents' generation do? What were they doing? Why didn't they raise their voices more? The Holocaust was very, very much known to people on this side of the Atlantic. I mean, there used to be a lore that people didn't know what was going on. Everybody knew about what was going on. The Hollywood Bowl in 1943 had a huge pageant with Edward G. Robinson and a bunch of the actors and actresses in Hollywood that chronicled every single thing: the concentration camps, the gas chambers, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It was very well known. And we were haunted by the fact that that generation didn't do much. And as a historian, I don't like to put myself in another generation's shoes because I'm not in their shoes, and you can't know exactly why people do what they do, and you got to walk a mile in their shoes from time to time. But we weren't going to repeat that result, and so one of my friends who writes, Yossi Klein Halevi, in the documentary about Soviet Jews, says that the Soviet Jewry movement gave us the opportunity to retroactively fight the Holocaust. And in a psychological way, that's the way I felt. And so anyway, I devoted most of my time not to studies.
Right. You have a scene where your history advisor.
Yeah, my doctoral advisor, I was a graduate student at UCLA in the UCLA History Department, British Empire history. My dad begged me not to go into British Empire history. My dad, among other things, was a history teacher. He said, "You'll never get a job. Nobody hires British Empire historians. If you're going to be a history teacher, try American or European." And of course, I didn't listen to my dad, and of course, he was right. But I had been arrested with a group of my colleagues, student colleagues, protesting the Osipov Balalaika Orchestra at the Shrine Auditorium. We weren't picketing the performers. We never called for a boycott. We didn't believe in that. But it was an informational picket line, and we went inside the auditorium. We bought tickets, and we sat in the front row of the balcony, and we unfurled, when intermission started, we unfurled these big banners that said, in Russian, that said, "Let my people go," hoping that the performers could see it from as the curtain came down. And we were arrested, and the cops were waiting for us, and my picture appeared being led out in handcuffs from the Shrine Auditorium on the third page of the Sunday Times and Sunday LA Times. And on Monday, I see my professor, Professor John S. Galbraith, not the economist, but equally as important a scholar in his field, which was British Empire history. John Galbraith calls me into his office, and he says, "Mr. Yaroslavsky, when are your academic pursuits going to take as much of your time as your extracurricular activities?" And I said, "I hear you, sir." But as I was walking out of his office, I said, "I'm out of here. I'm going to get my master's. I can't envision myself sitting in a library the rest of my life studying colonial office minutes. There's a world out there to save." And the hardest thing I ever had to do was to go back and tell Galbraith a few days later that I was going to leave after, quit the program at the end of the academic year. And he said, "I understand." He said, "I wish you the best." And 3 years later, I get elected to the board, to the city council.
Right.
2.5 years later, and I get a letter from Professor Galbraith. He said, "The British Empire's loss is Los Angeles' gain."
There you go. Let's jump ahead. If you can do a really quick thing on what I'm sure most people ask, which is, what in the hell is a 26-year-old doing even running, never mind winning?
Yeah, so I never had an ambition to run for office. I got the political bug not as a potential candidate, but as somebody. My ambition, my real ambition, more realistic ambition, in the early '70s was after getting the bug in the Soviet Jewry movement and lobbying Congress on some legislation. I would have loved to have gone to Washington and been a staffer on Capitol Hill.
Hmm.
I loved those folks and the issues they dealt with, and that wasn't practical at the time. Uh, some of the folks that I worked with in the McGovern campaign in '72, when Ed Edelman, my predecessor both on the city council and on the board of supervisors, a great public servant in his own right, when Ed announced he was going to run for the board of supervisors, and he came in first in the primary, he had to win in the general election, but in June of '74, it was clear he was going to win. Some of the folks I worked with in the McGovern campaign said, "Why don't you think about running for his seat when he leaves?" And my first reaction was, yeah, I don't have a base. I don't have, I can't raise money. You got to have some resources, and more and more people came to me who are not particularly sophisticated people, but I started getting it started. I started warming up to the idea. Make a long story short, talked to my wife about it, Barbara, and I said we have no kids. If I'm going to ever do this, now's the time to do it. I could take a leave of absence from my job, which was running the Council for Soviet Jews. I was teaching confirmation classes in synagogues in Long Beach and Woodland Hills and West Side. I'll keep that job because it doesn't take that much time, and we have enough money for to survive for 6 months. Barbara herself worked at UCLA. She was administrative assistant in the administration there, and so we could do it if and she said do it. Barbara was I still have her sign on the kitchen sink above the kitchen sink, which said a pessimist has no motor, an optimist has no brakes, and she had no brakes. Just do it. If you want to do it, that's what you should do. And she was all for it. She loved people a lot more than I did. I shouldn't say loved people. She was more comfortable with people, and she loved them. I loved people too, but I wasn't comfortable with them. I was, believe it or not, a shy person. When I walk into a room, I didn't walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Zev. What's your name?" That wasn't me.
That was much more her gift. Yeah.
That was, oh boy. I mean, she was one of those people. When she walked into a room, the room came to her.
Yeah.
And the longer she lived, she passed away 4.5 years ago. In fact, we just celebrated her birthday last week, and a freak, a casualty of West Nile virus. She got bit by a mosquito,
Oh.
and that. It was really a tragic thing for us. But the longer she got around, and and more people got to know her. She was a public servant in her own right. She served on the Medical Board of California for 13 years. She was on the Board of Nursing for several years before she died. She was on half a dozen boards here, the LA Free Clinic, and anyway, she was when she walked into a room, that room came to her, literally as well as figuratively, and uh, so I didn't know it at the time. I mean, that's what attracted me to her is her gregarious, outgoing personality, and just wonderful human being. But what I didn't appreciate is how that same aura about her and genuineness, authenticity about her that got my attention also got the attention of every single person with whom she came in contact. When she died, there were 1,100 people came to her funeral.
Oh my God.
1,100 people on December 30th, 2018. That was a holiday week. It was the day before. It was not meant. It was not advertised. We didn't say where the funeral was going to be. The word of mouth got 1,100 people to her funeral. It was just stunning, and it was I dedicated this book to her,
Yes.
and not just because she was my wife, but because of what I'm about to tell you. When you looked at the people in that sanctuary um, at her funeral, I mean, here was Eli Broad sitting over here, and Alex Padilla, now our U.S. senator, sitting over there. The mayor of Los Angeles eulogized her, and over there was uh, the woman cleaned our house for many years. My gardener uh, came. You know, the salt of the earth people from A to Z. So you had from a billionaire to a
Yeah.
minimum wage worker, and she touched them all. And anyway, I could, and I may actually do a book on her, not just from me, but to put an anthology of essays together from people who knew her, because I think that would be a great gift to her grandchildren. But she was a big asset to me, and when she said do it, you know, that was it, and it was going to be a long shot. I had been admitted to the UCLA School of Business in 1974. I asked them for a deferral. I actually found that letter that that granted me that deferral. I was looking around for something else, and I tripped over that letter a few weeks ago, and so I took a leave of absence from the business school, which I never actually stepped foot in, and funny thing happened on the way to business
Yeah.
school is I got elected to the city council. I did not expect it to happen. Nobody did. Probably the reason I won, there were a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that my opposition did not take me seriously.
Right, right. As you and I'm going to do this quickly,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
there was a runoff system, and out of three candidates who got the most votes, you beat the number three candidate by just 300 votes.
Yeah,
And the reason
359.
was, as you point out, that the two of them thought they were competing with each other.
Exactly.
And then you sneak in and you win, and your victory is a testament, one, to being overlooked, but two, to knocking on every door till people were tired of seeing you.
Yeah, it was. You know, if I'm nothing else, I'm disciplined. You know, I ran track in high school, you know, and you learn to, at least you learn from my coach, and I write about my coach a little bit, Dean Balzaret, who's still around coaching. Uh, you know that hard work produces dividends. John Wooden had the same,
Yeah.
you know, the same philosophy. You practice like you play, or sorry, you play like you practice. If you slough off, you're going to slough off in the game too. So I took I just walked every single day, 7 days a week. Uh, didn't matter whether it was raining. We had a lot of rain that spring, and by the way, walking precincts in the rain is the best vote getting tactic you can get. People
Oh,
are very impressed when you come with a raincoat in a driving rainstorm, and you know, and after dark, when people wouldn't open their doors, I'd go to bowling alleys and supermarkets, and yeah, you're right. People got, I'm voting for you. I'm voting for you. You know, quit bugging me.
yep.
And I really sensed it as the campaign went on. I sensed that the tide was turning, and I had no. I just wanted to be respectable in that election. When the first returns came in on election night in the primary, I was in fourth place. I had 12% of the vote. But in those days, uh, the more conservative candidates got the predominant percentage of the absentee votes, and there were very few early votes. Right, and it's not like it is. We didn't have vote by mail. It was you had to apply for an absentee ballot, etc. So I thought I was in good shape when I saw that I had 12% because the Republican in the race, we didn't run by parties, but I knew she posed positioned herself as the Republican. She was ahead, and I knew she wouldn't sustain that as the evening went on. And all of a sudden, you know, the real votes started coming in, the same day votes, and I catapulted into third place, and then I catapulted into second place, and I held on. I beat Roz Wyman, who had been the councilwoman who just passed away in the past year. Roz Wyman still is the youngest person to ever hold the
Right.
city council position, 22 years of age. She was elected in 1953, defeated in 1965, and trying to make a comeback in 1975. And my opponent, Fran Savage, who also just recently passed away, who became a good friend of mine once the election was over. Fran just beat up Roz. We've now seen the polling that they did. Her Fran Savage's campaign manager donated his files to the state archives, and one of the things in the state archives from her consultant was all the material they had about that 1975 council race. So It was part of the research I did for this book. I actually learned about it from a PhD student at UCLA who told me, the poll showed that you had 5% going in. And I said, what poll? He said, Savage's poll. I said, where did you see Savage's poll? And he told, well, they're in the archives up in Sacramento. So I made a beeline for Sacramento, and I found it. And the what had happened is that Roz, in the beginning, they took a poll, and Roz had 38% of the vote, and Fran and I had 5%. And nobody knew who Fran Savage was. She was a staffer to the mayor, administrative assistant to the mayor. And Roz, was still had a lot of name identification. And I was surprised that I had 5%, but people in the Jewish community, because of my work in Soviet Jewry, they had known me. I'd been on television a lot of our social action stuff. But it's one thing to have 5% at the beginning. It's another thing to catapult that, or to
Yeah.
into 20%. And what happened was Fran panicked about that, and decided to spend a lot of her money attacking Roz.
Sure.
And in the process, she she damaged Roz so much that Roz couldn't even get to second place. And that's, sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. But I got lucky that happened. But there's an old locker room placard at Fairfax High School that said, "Luck is where preparation meets opportunity," and you can make your own luck. And if I hadn't walked precincts every day for 6 months, if I hadn't shaken, tens of thousands of hands during that period of time, it wouldn't have made any difference. But it all worked out, and you know, I've often I wanted to ask the dean at the UCLA Business School, since I'm teaching there now, whether they're still holding a spot for me.
That's right. Right. Finally,
Yeah,
do something with your life. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah, Zev, we have gotten to the end basically, and
yeah. It's too bad.
and you've just run for office and you've just won. What I
Yeah,
want to let people know is that the book is this personal, but it is also about the city. It is about politics. It is about the evolution of the city. Um, and I'm just going to run through some of the things that you will deal with when you read the book. The Diamond Lane, which I'd forgotten about, was Zev's first uh, in office real political victory. Privacy and surveillance, the reign of the LAPD as a kind of a rogue outfit was a very meaningful issue to Zev, partially because of the experience he'd had with his ancestors in the Soviet Union. So this idea of invading people's privacy and surveillance was something that
Terrence, can I just interject on that
yeah,
very briefly?
yeah,
Uh, I was advised when I became a councilman, don't take on the LAPD. They
right,
have ways of getting back at you. And I said, I played hide and seek with the KGB in Moscow. Uh, LAPD is a walk in the park. Uh, and it's precisely, the Public Disorder and Intelligence Division, which was a misnomer for what they were. They were a monitoring agency. They monitored the political activities of people whose politics were different than the chief of police.
that's right.
I mean, people like John Mack, the head of the Urban League. I
Yep,
was on their list.
yep,
The pastor at the Episcopal Church in Pasadena was on their list. Women for was on their list. I mean, it was a horrible thing. And so one of the first things I did when I got there was to take that agency on. And people said, why'd you do that? And I tell my students, I said, if you're going to go into public life, actually any walk of life, you've got to look yourself in the mirror and say, what issue am I willing to lose my job over? Because if you can't answer that question, then you're going to be in trouble. You'll always be at the mercy of others. And for me, that issue is the Bill of Rights, is especially the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Uh, get the government out of your business. They have no business looking at infiltrating professors' classes at UCLA. One of my classes was infiltrated by a sergeant of the LAPD. Uh, by the way, one of the infiltrations took place in my office. There was a group
that's
of
right.
people who were advocating for a Freedom of Information ordinance for the city, and I was carrying that legislation. And we had a strategy meeting in my office, and one of the people who was part of that team who came into my office was an undercover cop for the PDID of the LAPD. That's outrageous.
Yes.
That's goddamn outrageous.
Yes.
And yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, and so that I was going to say, if we were going to get down to a couple of principles, that question, what issue, what cause are you willing to give up your job for, lose your job for, was one of them. And the other was that quote from Macaulay.
Yeah. Lord Thomas Macaulay, a British 19th century British liberal parliamentarian and a historian. And I tripped over his quote decades ago, and it stayed with me, and it was kind of my North Star. This quote is this: "No man is fit to govern great societies who hesitates about disobliging the few who have access to him for the sake of the many he will never see." And that was my philosophy as a councilman. But boy, when I became a county supervisor, which is the human service arm of our society, we deal with all of the people who are on the margins of society, usually through no fault of their own. We had to be mindful of the people we never see. The people who have lobbyists and can get into your office and know how to get a hold of you, they could take care of themselves. It's the people who, the janitors who were fighting for a living wage back in the 90s. I took up their cause. The people who are getting screwed by the rest of us, and who aren't seen and aren't heard, especially at the county where
Yes.
you have to find these folks. They weren't as well organized in the 90s and in the early 2000s as they are now. But that Macaulay quote always stuck with me, and it stuck with all my staff. I mean, my staff had to memorize that quote. No man is fit to govern great societies who hesitates about disobliging the few who have access to him for the sake of the many they never see. And the few who have access to him, disoblige them all you want. They'll take care of themselves.
Right, and as you did over your career. Okay, we've got to bring this to a close. We may want to do this again, Zev, when we jump into what's the difference between the city and the county. What's the difference between then and now? What does this have to tell us about the rest of the country and all the divisive polarization that has us distracted from the people we can't see and their needs? The issue of inequality, which I know is huge for you, its relationship to homelessness, etc., etc. But for right now, let me tell people, the book is ZEV'S Los Angeles, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power. The website where you can learn more about his current work is Luskin, luskin.ucla.edu. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to probably 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation and bring you up to speed, email me at temcnally, McNally, temcnally@mac.com, or you can also sign up at my website. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites. And you'll find years of podcasts at my site or those sites. Michael Lewis, Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Van Jones, Connie Rice, Greg Boyle, of Boyle Heights, by the way, George Packer. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Keanu Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all to you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, ZEV Yaroslavsky. Keep up the good work.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Terrence. Good to be with you.